Good day. My name is Teacher Scholastica. You are welcome to my biology class. And today we'll be looking at respiration. By this side of the board, we have our lesson objectives. And these are what you are expected to learn by the end of this lesson. And we argue that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to define respiration, mention the types of respiration, write the definition of aerobic respiration, write the formula for aerobic respiration, mention and explain the steps involved in aerobic respiration, mention and explain the roles of oxygen in aerobic respiration. So by the end of this lesson, we hope to achieve these 6 lesson objectives. We start with our first lesson objective, which is the definition of respiration. Now you'll be wondering, what is respiration? Respiration is defined as the exchange of gases between an organism and its environment, and glucose is oxidized to release energy. I repeat, respiration is the exchange of gases between an organism and its environment, and glucose is oxidized to release energy. On the other hand, you may choose to say that respiration is the process by which living cells break down glucose to release energy. Now, whether you choose to define respiration as the exchange of gases between an organism and its environment, and glucose is broken down to release energy, or you choose to say that respiration is the process by which living cells break down glucose to release energy. The important thing is that in the process of respiration, food substances is broken down and energy is released. And at this point, I would wish to inform us that the main purpose of respiration is the release of energy, which is used by the body to carry out its metabolic activities. With this, we have achieved our first instructional objective, which is to define respiration. The second instructional objective says that my learners should be able to mention the types of respiration. And I wish to inform you that there are 2 types of respiration. And these 2 types of respiration is based on whether or not oxygen is required for the respiration to take place. This means that respiration can take place in the presence of oxygen. Respiration can also take place in the absence of oxygen. Now, these are the 2 types of respiration. So these are the 2 types of respiration we have. We have aerobic respiration and we have the anaerobic respiration. Remember that the distinguishing factor here is the presence or the absence of oxygen. The aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration, we've been able to see the 2 types of respiration. And then we will go over to our third objective, which says that my learners should be able to write the definition of aerobic respiration. So, what is aerobic respiration? We say that aerobic respiration is the type of respiration that requires oxygen to take place. I repeat, aerobic respiration is the type of respiration that requires oxygen to take place. This implies that aerobic respiration cannot take place in the absence of oxygen. On the other hand, you can also say that aerobic respiration is a type of respiration that takes place in the presence of oxygen, involving the breakdown of glucose into carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So, this is for the definition of aerobic respiration, the type of respiration that takes place in the presence of oxygen to break down glucose into water, carbon dioxide, and energy. Remember, I told us that the main purpose of respiration is the release of energy. Here we have release of energy, here we also have the release of energy. Having learned the definition of aerobic respiration, we have achieved our third instructional objective. We go over to the fourth instructional objective, which says that my learners should be able to write the formula for aerobic respiration. Now, I wish to inform you that learning the formula of aerobic respiration would be easier if you are aware of the definition of aerobic respiration. And what did we say in the definition? We say that that glucose is broken down, the breakdown of glucose. So what is the chemical formula for glucose? We have 6 molecules of carbon, 12 molecules of hydrogen, 6 molecules of oxygen. If glucose is broken down, it means that glucose is on the reactant side. And then let us go over to the product side. And in the product side, we have that it is broken down into water, into carbon dioxide, and lastly, energy in form of ATP. So, we now say that it takes place in the presence of oxygen. So, we have oxygen here. This is simply the formula for aerobic respiration. And just to balance the equation, we should have 6 molecules of oxygen, 6 molecules of water, 6 molecules. So that is for the formula for aerobic respiration. Glucose is broken down to water, carbon dioxide, and energy in the presence of oxygen. With this, we have arrived at our fourth lesson objective. And we will go over to the fifth lesson objective, which says that my learner should be able to mention and explain the steps involved in aerobic respiration. So, the first thing we have here is mention. Before we talk about explaining the steps involved in aerobic respiration. Now, we have 3 steps involved in aerobic respiration. So these are the 3 steps that are involved in aerobic respiration. Remember that aerobic respiration requires oxygen to take place. We have the first one, glycolysis, followed by Krebs cycle, and lastly, the electron transfer chain. So these are the 3 steps involved in aerobic respiration. So by now, you should be able to mention the steps that are involved in aerobic respiration. And we go over to explaining these steps. The first one we have is glycolysis. Glycolysis is the first step in cellular respiration. Now, I didn't say the first step in aerobic respiration. I say that glycolysis is the first step in cellular respiration, which means that in both aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration, glycolysis is the first step. Glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm of cells. Of course, in our previous classes, we discussed the cell membrane, the cell organelles, and their functions. We mentioned the cytoplasm, where we call it the lipid component of the cell. And today you are learning that apart from just being the lipid component of the cell, the cytoplasm is also the site for glycolysis. Now, during glycolysis, glucose is broken down. Glucose is broken down to 2 molecules of pyruvate, producing a little quantity of ATP and NADH. So, at the end of the process of glycolysis, this is what is formed. 2 molecules of pyruvate producing a small amount of ATP and NADH. Now, this ATP we have here, it stands for adenosine triphosphate. Whereas the NADH, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. So this is what we arrive at the end of glycolysis, which is the first step of cellular respiration and which takes place in the cytoplasm of cells. Now, we go over to the second stage of aerobic respiration, which is the Krebs cycle. If you don't want to call this the Krebs cycle, You can also refer to it as the citric acid cycle or the tricarboxylic cycle. The reactions that take place in the Krebs cycle were first discovered by a man called Sir Hans Krebs. This implies that the Krebs cycle was named after the man that discovered the reactions that take place in the Krebs cycle. Unlike glycolysis, which takes place in the cytoplasm, Krebs cycle takes place in the mitochondria. It takes place in the mitochondria of eukaryotes. Of course, you know, we've done previously, we've treated the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes. So, it is in the mitochondria of the eukaryotes that the Krebs cycle takes place. Glycolysis starts with breaking down glucose into two molecules of pyruvate, ATP and NADH. But Krebs cycle bases its processes on the products of glycolysis. So in the process of Krebs cycle, these two molecules of pyruvate that were produced from glycolysis are further broken down carbon dioxide, NADH, and FADH2. So we have that the product, the pyruvate from glycolysis, when it comes to Krebs cycle, it is further broken down to carbon dioxide, the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and the flavin adenine dinucleotide. So this is what we have by the end of Krebs cycle. And these products of Krebs cycle, they carry high energy electrons. And these high energy electrons are what is transferred to the electron transfer chain. And now lastly, we are going to be looking at the electron transfer chain. The electron transfer chain happens to be the last stage of aerobic respiration. The compounds that are produced during the process of Krebs cycle, they contain high energy electrons. And these high energy electrons they contain are transferred to the electron transfer chain. When they are transferred to the electron transfer chain, their movement along the chain produce a lot of energy. Just like we have that electric energy can be generated by the movement of water in dams. In the same way, the movement of electrons on the electron transfer chain produces a lot of energy. This energy that is produced by the movement of these electrons is used in pumping protons. It's used in pumping protons, and the protons that are being pumped are the hydrogen ions. Now, once the pumping of the proton begins, immediately we get what we call the proton gradient. Of course, you have been taught, we've treated previously in this class about diffusion and osmosis, where we looked at concentration gradients. The same way we have concentration gradients, we also have pressure gradients. Apart from pressure gradient, we also have the temperature gradient. But for the process of respiration, we are looking at proton gradients, which is formed as a result of the pumping of the protons. Once a proton gradient is created, the ATP synthase begins work. The ATP synthase is the enzyme that is responsible for the synthesis of ATP. Remember that ATP is the energy that is produced at the end of respiration. Now, the ATP synthase bases its function on the proton gradient that has been created by the pumping of these protons. And then the ATP synthase synthesizes ATP through a process called oxidative phosphorylation. This happens to be the last stage of aerobic respiration. With this, we have been able to mention and explain the steps involved in aerobic respiration. Lastly, we are going to be looking at the roles. We mentioned and explained the roles of oxygen in aerobic respiration. Lastly, we will be looking at the roles of oxygen in aerobic respiration. And for the purpose of this lesson, we will be looking at two roles of oxygen in the process of aerobic respiration. The first one is that oxygen serves as a final electron acceptor. And secondly, oxygen prevents the accumulation of lactic acid. Now, these are the two roles of oxygen which we'll be looking at for the purpose of this class. How does oxygen serve as a final electron acceptor? When we are looking at the electron transfer chain, we mentioned that during the steps that are involved in aerobic respiration, electrons are produced, protons are produced, and we mentioned the hydrogen ion as the proton being produced in the process of aerobic respiration. Now, when these hydrogen ions are produced, chances are they may become in excess and there is need for their reduction. It is just as good as cleaning up the space so that the reaction will continue to take place of preventing the accumulation of this ion is played by oxygen. Oxygen plays this role by accepting these ions and reacting with hydrogen to form water. That is why in aerobic respiration, we say that glucose is broken down to form carbon dioxide, to form water, and to form energy. This water that is formed is because oxygen is the final electron acceptor, accepting the hydrogen ion, reacting with them to form water. We go over to preventing the accumulation of lactic acid. When respiration takes place in the absence of oxygen, it results in the partial breakdown of glucose. What I'm trying to say is that glucose cannot be completely broken down during respiration in the absence of oxygen. Therefore, in the absence of oxygen, glucose is partially broken down to lactic acid. So when glucose is partially broken down, one of the products we have is lactic acid, which is 3 molecules of carbon, 6 molecules of hydrogen, 3 molecules of oxygen. That is for lactic acid. And once lactic acid is formed and accumulated in the muscle, it leads to what we call muscle soreness. In other words, muscle soreness is as a result of the accumulation of lactic acid in the muscle. Now, what oxygen does is to further break down lactic acid. And once there is a further breakdown of lactic acid, the accumulation of lactic acid in the muscle is prevented. And once the accumulation of lactic acid in the muscle is prevented, it means that muscle soreness can be avoided. Now, remember we said that for the course of this class, these two uses of oxygen in the process of aerobic respiration is what we are going to be looking at. With this, we have been able to achieve our last lesson objective. I will quickly give a summary. We looked at the definition of respiration, and we defined respiration as a process by which living cells break down glucose to release energy. And I told you that you can also say that respiration is the process by which living organisms exchange gases with their environment, and glucose is oxidized to release energy. There are two types of respiration: the aerobic respiration and the anaerobic respiration. We have the chemical formula for aerobic respiration, where we have that oxygen, which is O2, reacts with glucose, which is C6H12O6, to produce carbon dioxide CO2, water H2O, and energy in the form of ATP. We talked about the steps involved in aerobic respiration, where we talked about glycolysis, which takes place in the cytoplasm to release just a little amount of ATP. We have the Krebs cycle that takes place in the mitochondria to release a large amount of ATP. And then we have the electron transfer chain, which also takes place in the mitochondria, just like the Krebs cycle. But the electron transfer chain takes place in the crystal of the mitochondria. We go back to the electron transfer chain, where we have the movement of the electrons, releasing energy that is used in the pumping of the protons, and then the creation of the proton gradients, leading to the production of ATP by the ATP synthase. I'm able to mention and explain the roles of oxygen in aerobic respiration. We talked about two roles, where we have the final electron acceptor, where oxygen reacts with hydrogen to form water, and then we have preventing the accumulation of lactic acid, where oxygen further breaks down lactic acid, preventing its accumulation in the muscles and thereby preventing muscle soreness. In our next class, we will be looking at anaerobic respiration. You can reach out to me through my number here in case you have any question. For your assignments, you have to write the definition of respiration and the definition of anaerobic respiration. I am very happy to have you in my class today, and I believe you learned a lot as we are able to achieve lesson objectives. Make sure to do your assignments, and I'll be glad to see you in my next class. I remain Teacher Scholastica. The biology class is over for now until our next session. Bye.